In this first video, we're going to introduce the process in conducting a regression analysis with a single predictor. And in this file you see here we have all of our necessary equations to carry out our calculations. And on the left hand side we have our raw data. Now we have 11 participants in this fictional study, and in this particular study the interest was to examine the relationship between marijuana usage among young adults and the usage of other drugs, non-marijuana drugs, with the research concern that that marijuana may serve as a gateway drug to the use of other drugs. And a preliminary analysis, and we're not going to go through the steps here on how this was calculated, but we're just going to provide the correlation coefficient of 0.9314. Now we see a very high value here for indicating that there is a strong correlation between marijuana usage and other drugs, and this is a positive value indicating greater marijuana usage is related to greater usage of other drugs. But in this process what we want to do first is to generate a regression equation using the format of y equals a plus bx, where a is the y-intercept and b is the slope. So the first step we need to do is to calculate some descriptive statistics for each of our two variables. If we take a look at the equation to calculate the two regression coefficients for a and for b, for the y-intercept and the slope of the relationship between the two variables, we see that we require the average values for the y variable, the x variable, the standard deviations of each, and the r statistic, the correlation coefficient. And for the slope we need the correlation coefficient and the standard deviations of the two variables. So we'll come back to these two equations, and the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to type in the label here for the mean or the average and the standard deviation. And I want to calculate the average of the data for marijuana usage, and I'm going to hit the equal sign and type in average, shift 9, and I'm just going to grab all the cells that I want to calculate the average for. I'm going to shift 0, close that parenthesis, and hit enter. Now I want to likewise do the same for standard deviation, but this requires a different command. So I'm going to hit the equal sign. STDEV is the command to calculate the standard deviation. I shift 9 for open parenthesis, and I grab the data that I want to calculate the standard deviation for, and I shift 0 and I hit enter. Now I'm just going to scroll over to carry these commands over to the other variables. So I grab the bottom right hand corner, I'm going to pull it over, and if I click this and read the dialog box, you see that we have the average value from C2 down to C12. And likewise I'm going to do the same for the standard deviation. And just to confirm, we have the standard deviation across cells C2 to C12. Now our next step here is to go ahead and calculate our A and B coefficients. Now I'm just going to give that a label here. I'm just going to type in coefficient A, and I'm just going to type in coefficient B. So now I'm going to manually insert and type in the equation so that Excel can do these calculations for me. So I'm going to start with the equal sign. And the first entry we see here is that we need the average value for the y variable, which is our criterion variable. That's what we're trying to predict. And in this study, the criterion variable would be the other drugs. We're trying to examine, or we're interested in examining if marijuana usage is a statistically significant predictor of the use of other drugs. So making other drugs our criterion variable. So we need the criterion variable average. I'm just going to click the average because I calculated it here. I'm going to hit the dash, which is the subtraction, and I'm going to subtract this entire product, which means I have to shift 9 for parentheses, and the first value I need to enter is the correlation coefficient, which is right here in D2. And I'm going to shift 8 for multiply. I'm going to enter in another set of parentheses here because I want to isolate the fraction between the standard deviation of the criterion variable divided by the standard deviation of the predictor variable. And because I calculated those already, I'm going to click this cell here. I'm going to forward/. I'm going to divide that by the standard deviation of our predictor variable. I'm going to shift 0, and I've got one more element to enter into this to the second term of the equation, and I need to shift 8, and I need to multiply that by the average for the predictor variable, and that's right here. I close parentheses and I hit enter, and we have our coefficient, our first regression coefficient A, which is our y-intercept. Now the equation is a little bit smaller for the slope, so I'm going to put that right here. I'm going to hit the equal sign, and in this case I just can go ahead and click the correlation coefficient, and I'm going to multiply that, and I'm going to use the parentheses here because I like to keep my terms organized, and I'm going to divide SY by SX, a standard deviation of our criterion variable, / the standard deviation of our predictor variable. Close parentheses, I hit enter, and now we have the slope for our second correlation coefficient. So that will end this first video on using Microsoft Excel to calculate the statistics related to regression analysis.